დღეს ჩვენი სტუმარია ჟურნალისტი და ავტორი ელის ფეირინგი, რომელიც წერს ღვინოსა და მოგზაურობაზე, ესეთი გავლენიანი მედიებისთვის, როგორც არის York Times and Forbes, მას ასევე აქვს საკუთარი ბლოგი, რომელზეც დიდი ხანია წერს ღვინოზე, The Feiring Line, ის არის ავტორი 6 წიგნისა ღვინის შესახებ, მათ შორის ქართველი მკითხველისთვის ცნობილია მისი წიგნი The Naked Wine, რომელიც ქართულად ითარგმნა ასეთი სახელწოდებით სრულქმნილი ღვინო და განსაკუთრებით მისი წიგნი For the Love of Wine, რომელიც უშუალოდ საქართველოს მევენახეობა-მეღვინეობის გამოცდილებას და თანამედროვეობას ეხება. ეს არის ცნობილი როგორც ნატურალური ბუნებრივი მეღვინეობის ერთ-ერთი დიდი მხარდამჭერი და ასევე მხარდამჭერი ქართული მცირე მარნებისა და ბუნებრივი მეღვინეობისა. First of all, thank you, Alice, for the opportunity and for your precious time. And please tell us about your background, professional experience. Where are you coming from? How was your first touch with wines? How did you start wine writing?
Okay, I am from New York City, and I started drinking wine, being curious about wine when I was in high school. I don't come from a wine background at all. There was really no wine in the family. And I moved to Boston in Massachusetts, one of the states in the United States, for graduate school, and I had a roommate who was in the wine business, and our apartment became a place to taste wine twice a week. And so after a few years I knew something and I kept it going. I moved back to New York City to follow a writing career, not necessarily wine writing, and I started doing journalism, and I wrote about wine, food, and design. And then at a certain point when I discovered something in the universe that was very disturbing to me, which is the kind of wine technology which was changing the nature of wine, and yet nobody knew about it. That's when I really started writing about wine, and that's when I became known for the kind of writing I do.
It's very interesting. Although the many people who make natural wines, who write about natural wines, put the different senses in natural wine, the term and notion itself. I know that you have your very determined, exact, precise attitude. What does the natural wine mean for you?
So natural wine to me means starting with organic viticulture, and then I shorten it to nothing added, nothing taken away in the winemaking process. So basically you have the grape, the skins, the pips, the stems, you have everything you need in that grape. You use whatever it is inside that grape, and those are your additives. Except maybe some minimal sulfur, depending on the vintage, and depending on the vintage, perhaps some filtration, very coarse filtration, though ideally neither. So it's pretty simple.
It's very interesting. What was the reflection of the idea behind the natural wines among more old school wine judges and old school representatives and sommeliers? I know that some of them from the very beginning were very skeptical, even criticizing you, and even there was a lot argue about the terms as well, like natural wine versus home wine, or wild yeasts versus natural yeasts. It shows us definitely the attitude, of course. From this point of view, from these days, what can you say? Does this attitude in the old school wine professionals have been changed?
Yes and no. It's a very complicated question that you ask, because most of today's professional sommeliers are trained by an education system that is in support of the conventional wines and conventional taste. So this is still very much an attitude, but yet the people want a wine that tastes more real and more alive. So you have two forces, and I think there's And just by the sheer number of natural wine bars and the natural wine fairs throughout the world, that we see that people really want this taste. And there are a lot of defectors from traditional sommelier, less so with wine writers or wine critics, because their readers are still, I think, a little bit more conventional. But I don't really know if that's the future of wine drinking. So I think the people have spoken, people want natural wine. The people have spoken, they would like natural wine that is good natural wine. And so not so many very dramatic flaws. As somebody once said to me, the best wine in the world is natural wine and the worst wine in the world can't be natural wine. So it depends. But when you put a really good natural wine into somebody's hands, they go, how is this possible? This is delicious. And so natural wine is delicious.
Well, natural, when we're speaking about the natural wines, there is a lot to say about the stories behind it. Mm-hmm. So natural wine is not something which is a good wine itself, right, independently, but we can also see the stories beyond those good wines, right? And in your writings, it's also very articulated that the boundaries between the wines and the authors of those wines are very dense. So what do you think? Many people say that the wine reflects the author. Mm-hmm. Do you agree with that?
A lot of times it does. You meet a very, very controlled person. That wine is usually going to be very controlled and no tolerance for, let's say, a little bit of volatility, which I don't mind, or it will just be very controlled. There are some people who are completely on intuition, and the wines there may be a little bit hit or miss, but when they hit, they're completely gorgeous. Some people have trouble focusing, and those wines may be pretty inconsistent. So without a doubt, that I think it really does reflect the author. Wine has a voice, just the way a writer has a voice, or a musician or a composer. You know, it's the stamp of that person.
Can we understand it on the social and gender level as well? I mean, can we see the wines as made by woman or man, or wines for men or women?
I don't believe so. I think that there's absolutely no difference. I don't think on a blind tasting you could possibly determine a gender.
How did you hear about Georgia first? What's your connection story with our country?
Just, let's see, I think a friend of mine who came over from Moscow in the late 60s and is a pretty prominent food journalist, talked to me about Georgia around 2001, and really, you know, she was trying to organize people to come, and I was really excited about it. And I've always been very fascinated with winemaking from post-Soviet countries. So I was super excited, but nothing happened there. Then after my first book came out, I was in California doing book events, and a friend of mine brought over for a dinner a Vino Terra Kisi. Yeah, and it was 2008, so it was probably a 2006 vintage. And it was a little bit lacking in acidity, and I was, you know, I didn't know about the storage of the wine, but I was super intrigued, and I really liked it. And I just, so that,
Kisi, your first
it was, yeah, Kisi. And was totally charmed by it. Then in 2010, Chris Terrell, who was starting to bring over Georgian wine, sent me some Vino Terra and some Pheasant's Tears. And I wrote about Pheasant's Tears in Naked Wine, as far as it was also, storage was not, it wasn't the wine's fault, it was the storage of the wine that was suspect. Mm-hmm. But in 2011, I was invited to come over for the first International Qvevri Conference. There weren't too many more after that. And it was immediate love.
In Georgia, among the wine professionals, did you notice at that time the interest and focus towards Kvery like we have currently?
Well, I mean, back in those days, people didn't even know where Georgia was. People certainly didn't know what a Kvery was, even though it was Josko Grosvenor who was using Georgian Kvery, but he was just calling them amphora. So whenever I wrote about it, people were like fascinated. But the notion that they were buried was the extra fascination with them. So, but yeah. So it was certainly, it was very attention-getting, for sure. Yeah.
But I mean, inside Georgia, was there many winemakers who were making Kveries, or this more concentration around Kvery started after the international recognition?
It did start, I believe, after national recognition in 2011. I think there were only 2 remaining Kvery makers in Georgia, and that number is now increased. There were, people had ancient Kvery in their grandfather's Marani, and it certainly existed, but on a commercial level, not many. And a lot of those Kveries were not in good condition anymore. So things have certainly changed dramatically since 2011. But even when I met people in Georgia, in Tbilisi, even in the city, there didn't seem to be a big local knowledge about Kvery or how wine was made in Georgia.
And as for outside Georgia, so 15 years ago, Georgia was not even, as you mentioned already, was not even marked on the Georgian wine map, world wine map. So, and now so many people know about Georgia, not probably that many that we want to know, but many people, really many people know about Georgia. And of course, like without arguing, one of the factors was your writings and your contributions to raise awareness about Georgia and Georgian wines. What do you think, as a person who contributed in this, how the picture changed so far?
Well, going back a little bit, I think it was in 2009 that there was a Georgian wine agency show of Georgian wines in New York City that I went to before I went to Georgia. And the only, I forgot how many people they had there, like maybe 30 wineries. There was only one who made wine in Kvery. Only one, showing their wines. When I came here in 2011, Pheasant's Tears probably was the only full-time winemaker who made wine naturally. There were only really 5 commercial natural winemakers.
It was in 2009.
2011.
11.
There were only 5. They were like, and that's what I based For the Love of Wine on. Those, what I call the fathers of modern natural wine out of Georgia. And now, what are there, like 180? I mean, that's not a very long time. So it's tremendous. And if there's interest, which there is tremendous interest in Georgia, there are several things. Yes, I think my writing has had something to do with it. I think the fact that in those beginning years that the country of Georgia was sending people out into the world and helping winemakers go to France to show their wines, go to Japan, go to Australia. That really helped a great deal, So kudos there. It was supported by the state, which was nice.
Yeah,
very nice.
I didn't know about
yes,
that.
yeah. And very important. And of course, bringing people to Georgia, that also had a lot to do, because it's true, once you come to Georgia, there are very few people who don't immediately fall in love with Georgia. It's just the way it goes. But also the taste of the wine. You know, it's not just about a romantic notion of a Marani and Kvery. It is the taste of the wine, which is very particular and very delicious and different.
Mm-hmm. I have heard from some wine lovers, let's say like that, that they really enjoy Georgian wines, but sometimes the Eastern Georgian wines are a little bit too much for European and American palate. Like for introduction in Georgian wines, like Kakhetian wines sometimes are a little bit too much. Is it like that?
Well, I would say also conversely. I remember the first time Gela Patashvili came to France, and I was with John Mortimer and Gela, and he really had a hard time understanding European wines. They were just, you know, he wanted a strong wine, and it was pretty funny. But right now there's such, you know, there's more to Georgian wine than a very big saperavi or a very strong skin contact with katsateli. There's a tremendous variety of kinds of wines coming out of Georgia. So sometimes you give somebody a Californian wine, like I can't drink Cabernet from California, it's too difficult. So, you know, we don't only have one palate. You know, everybody has a specific taste. And right now what's coming out of Georgia, there is a wine for every different kind of palate. So they're just showing the wrong wine.
Yeah. As for that, about Californian wines, years ago you criticized Californian wines. You told that they were a little bit too over-alcoholed,
over oaked,
too much wooden influence,
and overpriced.
Overpriced.
And
yeah,
overpriced.
yeah. As for that, do you think that, because I have also got the feedback like that from the different people, sometimes are some Georgian wines like over alcoholed, over macerated, especially it refers to the warm climate regions?
You know, I think that one can do a whole book, or at least a really interesting article, just based on the evolution of saperavi, and probably the Kakhetian style Soviet era saperavi was probably all about strength and strong and macerated wines. I'm not so sure pre-Soviet Union, when things were mostly co-planted. We don't know. But if we could ever find those wines, but what we know of older winemaking culture, everything would have been co-planted and probably vinified at the same time. So it probably wasn't that strong. So it really is almost it was blends. I would imagine, because it was the same thing pretty much everywhere. What grew together was fermented together. But yes, there is that style of saperavi that is certain, but at least it's not over oaked. At least it's not over oaked. And also those wines with age can develop very beautifully. So, you know, it's a certain style of wine, and I think I'm not sure, but I attribute Zurab Taparadze with experimenting with a different way of making. To me, he was the first person who experimented with a much more drinkable style of saperavi and bringing towards it a very interesting character. And now you are finding that, and you are finding some saperavi with some other white grapes. So it's a very interesting evolution that what we're seeing now. So I think it's really important that that style still stays, but that it's expanded to include different styles of winemaking.
I see. What is the potential of Georgian wines you see, you consider now, like probably amber wines for sure, which is like already a kind of mark of Georgian wine, a symbol. But what else, like blends that you mentioned?
Yeah, I think so tomorrow I'm going to be talking about the impact of climate crisis and natural wine and whether it can even continue, which we'll find out tomorrow what the answer to that is. But we're seeing in Georgia a lot more blends, which are a very interesting way to go. I'm not so sure about the trend in the East, especially for some non-skin contact whites. I think that's going to be very difficult to continue with what's going on with the climate, because there was a reason. I think it's very important that people who are making wine here and maybe are loving a lot of European wines, that there is a reason that skin contact was important in the East. And it does make it easier to ferment. And it is much easier to make a natural wine with skin contact in the East than without. But we are seeing some, depending on the vintage, some pretty interesting examples of that. And of course, everybody has a pet nut. So it's pretty exciting. I mean, when I came in,
a lot of pet nuts.
a lot, maybe too much.
Georgia.
Yeah. So that I think what has happened with experimenting with so many different styles of winemaking, that also when I first came in 2011, there was really, you know, it was Saperavi, Riccatelli, Solocor, Ginori, Siska. You know, when you saw Krakluna, it was exotic. So now, I think the world who's drinking Georgian wine, their knowledge of grapes is expanded, and you see a lot more of the rare grapes, the previously rare grapes. And so it's pretty exciting what's happening.
Great. What is Qvevri for you? For you, a person who researches a lot about Qvevri, and also for the people who are drinking Qvevri wines outside Georgia, is it like more, I have also heard sometimes that it's like more romanticism, it's more something not sustainable on the global kind of market issues? No. Do you see it as a sustainable style, the amber wines from Qvevri?
I think the most unsustainable thing about Qvevri is how difficult it is to clean them. For me, that's, you know, it's, if you're willing to really do the work, I don't understand really why technology can't help there. That's where technology can help, with really getting how to keep the Qvevri healthy. So there's no mufa, but I think as a vessel, I know it's not only does it have a great story, and it is very linked with an 8,000-year tradition that I think makes a tremendous difference about Georgia in the world of wine, and a point of difference. I think it's a tremendously beautiful vessel. And when it works well, it works beautifully. So it really is just how to clean it. That's the only thing unsustainable, because you know,
yeah,
you have your initial investment, and then it's going to be good for decades,
I see. Yeah,
centuries.
okay.
You know, it's an interesting emotional and philosophical problem that I imagine exists in Georgia, is how to deal with stainless steel, which is a vessel I don't like because it's very reductive and not a lot of life. Personally, I like clay, I like concrete, old oak, not oak, I mean chestnut. But I think concrete and clay are my favorites. Yeah.
As you were mentioning the post-Soviet time of where we are also struggling to define where we are, who we are, in terms of on each layer, on each level, like in terms of national identity, but also in gastronomy, food culture, in winemaking, wines, wine culture, viniculture. So we are searching our identity to figure out where we are and what we are. What do you think as an insider and outsider at the same time? The person who researches from the different culture, but also knows a lot about Georgian wine. How do you see Georgia?
In a world context, or?
In the world wine context, yes.
How do I see Georgia? Well, I need help sharpening that question a little bit, because, okay, or I'll just try to freeform it. For me, Georgia has a very important role in the world of wine, and it's not an oddity. It's not an eccentric, cute little country, you know, by the Black Sea. It has an important story with important varieties. I think I would love to see the world and the sommelier world to understand the difference between East and West and North. People forget about, yeah, and understand that in the tiny country, not only does it have an enormous amount of native grapes, but it has tremendously different terroirs and fascinating terroirs. And I would like to see a little bit more of that celebration inside of Georgia.
So diversity, right?
Yeah, yeah. The diversity and also like celebration of the Inoretti wines and the Chkumi, and you know, it's like, and I'd like to see more wines coming out of Gori. I don't know why there aren't more wines in Gori. Or maybe I have to go in and taste.
We have to taste it.
We have to, okay.
Yeah, I saw a lot of.
Okay, are they coming? Because I remember the first time I went to Gori, it's like, oh my God, this place is amazing.
Yeah.
So it's a tiny country with tremendous diversity. And I think maybe that's the next step of getting the message out about Georgia.
Yeah. So as for the fair itself, zero compromise. So it's already a few years it is holding in Tbilisi, and it's already has its international context, and the winemakers from the different countries as well as from the different regions of Georgia participate, and that's a lot of fusion there, right? And what do you think? How does the fairs work for especially for the small wineries?
Well, on one hand, there are too many wine fairs in the world right now. There are too many natural wine fairs.
In Georgia as well.
In Georgia as well.
Yeah.
But I think it's been enormously important in bringing people to Georgia to actually see the that diversity that I was talking about. And you know, in 10 years, like how there was, Russia was just known for the semi-sweet wines, and now we're getting a diversity out of there. So I think there are people who are just fascinated by what's happening, and it's thrilling to see people coming from all over the world.
Mm-hmm. So I was going to ask you about the state policy, who is for several years already declared that they are trying to transform the image of this post-Soviet image of Georgian wine. And one of the main messages of Georgian wine on the different markets is Saperavi, for instance. And I already guess that what will be your answer according to the previous question, but I still want to ask you, do you agree with that? Is that Saperavi that will like be a kind of do the groundbreaking? No, absolutely not. In fact, I think that it's probably the groundbreaking is, you know, I really don't want Georgia to lose the really heavy duty skin contact, 6 to 8 months skin contact of Riccatzelli, because I think that is more of a calling card. And it's a style that personally I adore. And I see people lightening up and less and less. And then when you get to a good old-fashioned, you know, strong skin contact wine, that just is so Eastern and of the desert, and it's beautiful. I think Saperavi can be, I mean, I think perhaps they're looking for that conventional cigar smoking, a wine that can go past the cigar smoke. I think it's a very old-fashioned Robert Parker notion of what wine is. I actually think it's wrong. Important.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's wrong. There's so many other. I remember, like I remember the first time I had Ogileschi, and was completely. That is, you know, a grape from a region, which you know well, that blew me away. And I remember it was very much like it could be very much in a Beaujolais style and very drinkable, but interesting, fascinating. When you grow a grape, so if you do that over-extracted, old-fashioned Saperavi-like wine, it may be very good drinking in 10 years, 15 years, 20 years. But it really is about the fruit and the extraction, and you really don't get the place so much.
Yeah, it's a kind of the projects when they are named with the name of labeled chateau in Georgia, right?
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
Chateau Otskana or something.
Yeah, right.
That's fun. Yeah, and the last question is about the natural wines itself, because you wrote in 2019, I think, where the natural winemaking is going, where the natural wines are going, because as everything very valuable, very live, to some point it goes to the extremely marketing messages on the ground, right? What's the situation now?
So I believe the title of that article was, "Is Natural Wine Dead?" And I remember the last line of that piece was, "Natural wine is dead, long live natural wine." So what I was talking about was at the beginning of the natural wine, there's always been a natural wine world, I mean, for centuries. As long as there's money to be made in wine, somebody will find a way to corrupt its soul. So at the beginning of this revolution of natural winemaking, it was filled with idealism, and it came out of the people. And then people realized, oh, we can make money on natural wine. And then the marketers came in, and wine was very quick to bottle, and people did not take the time to raise it, to make sure the wine was stable. So we had a lot of bad wine on the market, which was very bad for natural wine. But natural wine will continue to evolve, because it's like saying, organic food is going to go away. Organic food is a trend, or the taste of a really beautiful tomato is over. It's just marketing. No, I mean, good taste is something that tastes good is universal. And other things can become a fad. So new oak was a fad. There's never been really new oak in the world of winemaking. It was always, the wood flavor was always taken out before wine was put in. It was used for something else. That was a fad. But the future of natural wine will depend on, I think, what the climate will allow. And will we have to use some intervention as the yeast population in the world is challenged? Now, that's a whole different story, but natural wine is very much alive. It has had a tremendous impact on the world. Wine has a very small footprint. Most of the wine in the world today is still conventional. However, almost everywhere people are reconsidering their vessels. There is an increase in clay and concrete, and the vessel that's going to have the least impact on the flavor of the wine. And people are reconsidering how much sulfur. People are going back to native yeast fermentation. So the impact is huge. It's not going away.
Great. Thank you for your time.
A great pleasure.
It was a great pleasure to me as well.